Eric Bugenhagen, aka Rick Boogs, is a WWE wrestler and a YouTube personality. He reminds me a lot of Victor Blut, who's also what I call a modern strongman. Now, the way he trains with the kettlebell is fascinating, and there's a lot of stuff that we can learn. But before we get started, I have a gift for you. 30 days filled with kettlebell workouts for free. Check the first link in the description. Grüezi miteinander, Gregory von Lebe hier. A small history lesson. If it wasn't for the types that Eric Bugenhagen is, these kind of strongmen who are crazy, who lift and throw heavy weights around, the kettlebell wouldn't probably be here today. Right around the turn to the 19th century, the Turners, which are the fathers of German gymnastics and gymnastics as a whole, were the first ones who were describing the usage of objects that look like a sphere. A little bit later came Felice Napoli, who was considered the grandfather of physical culture. Now, we cannot say for certain that he trained with kettlebells, but he was working with club bells and maces. So the assumption that he was also probably training with spherical weights or canned weights or kettlebells isn't far-fetched. Long story short, strongmen are responsible for turning the kettlebell from a market weight into an exercise tool. So let's jump into the specific exercises that Eric Bugenhagen, aka Rick Boogs, is demonstrating. The first exercise that we see is a swing, and he does it with a 92 kilogram kettlebell, which is approximately 200 pounds. Now, in my book, that's exactly how you should do it, if you have the strength. Of course, most of us will never have to use a 92 kilogram kettlebell to swing to get good results. Matter of fact, as Eric goes on in the video, there might be some diminishing returns at the end as he's trying to crank out these reps. But I see nothing wrong here. Yes, we see a little bit of leaning back, but that's using your body's leverage. Using the body's leverage can be demonstrated with a couple of exercises. I'd like to use the snatch. Now watch what I do as I swing the kettlebell up in a top fixation and then I drop it back down. Watch. What I'm essentially doing is I'm turning the palm towards me, I'm unlocking the elbow, and now I'm leaning back. The reason why I do this is because I want to close the distance from the kettlebell to my center of mass. That's how I'm using my body's leverage in the amortization phase. And as the kettlebell comes back up, I'm using my body's leverage again to heave the weight back up. As we like to say in the snatch, the hips lead, the arm heaves. The next exercise is the overhead squat. And from what I can see in the way Eric's body behaves is, I'm assuming that he's a pretty tall guy. We have clients who are fairly tall and they suffer from similar mobility problems. Now, mobility might be a couple of things. It might be in the shoulder, it might be in the hips, or it might be in the ankles. However, what is also possible is that his hips does not allow for more range of motion. You can stretch and move however you want. If your hip or your femur, the upper leg, sits deep in the socket of the hip, you are limited with mobility. However, you probably have a better application of force production. I, for example, have a Slavic hip. My femur sits fairly loose in the socket. That's why it has a huge range of motion, but it doesn't have the same force production. Now, with this in mind, I want to demonstrate what an overhead squat looks like. Greg Cook from FMS says that the overhead squat demonstrates how well your upper and your lower body communicate. Now, we have to have great ankle mobility, we have to have some good hip mobility, and I have to have some straight arm strength and also some good shoulder mobility. If these areas are taken care of, this is what it looks like. I'm starting in that overhead position. I have the arm fully extended and locked. The kettlebell sits in that so-called hand insertion where the weight is now pointing laterally away from me and it sits on my elbow and my shoulder joint. Now what I do, I have a little bit wider than shoulder width stance. I push both of my feet outwards. Now I hinge a little bit and I immediately push my legs outwards and start bending the knees, and I keep my upper body as upright as possible. If you struggle with this exercise, try doing an overhead squat without any weights first. Next up, we see Eric snatch a 40 kg kettlebell. Now I see two things here. Because Eric is using all of his strength, he's not using so-called high volume techniques where you can use heavier weights and work for longer sets of time. He's fairly tight throughout the whole movement, and this makes the exercise a little bit harder than what it has to be. Please do not misunderstand the last statement with thinking that the kettlebell snatch is an easy exercise. Matter of fact, it is quite the opposite. It is one of the hardest kettlebell exercises you can do that requires a lot of strength, a lot of endurance, and a lot of skill. Now, in order to demonstrate these high volume techniques, I grab a 28 kg kettlebell with me sitting at approximately 72 kilograms of body weight. Now, that's a little bit the equivalence of what Eric is snatching. Now, there's two things that I want to do. First of all, as I'm snatching the weight back up, I want to jump into the so-called hand insertion. You see, Eric is pointing his palm forward. If you do this, you burn out your arms. The idea is to have your thumb pointing slightly towards your skull and inserting your wrist deep inside the kettlebell window. As I drop the bell, as I demonstrated a couple of seconds earlier, I use this leverage technique where the kettlebell comes back down and then I snatch it back up. Another thing that you can see Eric do is he's going into a so-called deadlift snatch. The reason why he does this is because gravity pull is so hard that you want to compensate by bending the knees a little bit. Yes, you can do this. However, what happens is the circle becomes a little bit wider down here, which makes it a little bit harder to swing the weight back up. Now, this is my snatch. Watch it. Next up, we see Eric using some type of flow where he's out in the wilds on the concrete street in his shorts while it is raining. Makes a cool background. However, when it comes to safety, I'm not sure if all boxes are checked. Now, the flow that he demonstrates is cool. He's doing some around the worlds, some cleans, some stuff. And if you want to engage into a flow, I would recommend a lighter weight. And then we combine these ballistics all together the way we want. It might look like this. Now, I'm not the perfect guy when it comes to flows. There are people who do it way better than me. The idea is just to flow with the kettlebell and treat it like low intensity, steady state cardio. Finally, we see Eric demonstrating a variation of the Turkish get up. We call this the Turkish squat up. The Turkish squat up that he demonstrates is the one gripe that I have with his exercises. And that is on the way down, you want to make sure that you are safeguarding your back. As you can see in the video, Eric just drops down on the back like a bag of rice on the concrete pavement while it is raining. So let me demonstrate what a Turkish squat up should look like. I start overhead. And now we already covered the overhead squat, so I go down. And then from this position, I reach backwards. Now I extend my left leg. Now I go down on my elbow, and then I use my right leg as stabilizer and compensation to go back down on my back. Then I'll drop the bell back down, then I come back up. And that's the part where Eric is probably missing. You want to safeguard your back, and also on your way up, use your elbow, use your hands, now shift the body weight and come back up. So here's the next thing that you have to do. Like the video, consider subscribing and share with a friend, and then check out this video. We might got you interested into kettlebells. We're all about kettlebell training. And if you're just getting started, I want you to watch this video. Tutorial, workout, everything included for people who are just getting started. So go watch it right now.